So given those 5 good reasons there, this is the way I'm planning on doing cucumbers in the future, as opposed to putting... What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Friday, August 23rd here in South Georgia, and on today's video I'm going to tell you how I kind of accidentally discovered a new way to trellis cucumbers, and I'm going to give you 5 reasons why I think this way is better than the old way we were doing it. So our late summer / fall planting of cucumbers is doing really great. We've got the Supremo pickling cucumbers right here, and then we've got those mini seedless Katrina cucumbers right here. So you can see with these Supremos here, just loaded up with flowers there and starting to give us some really good production. Picked a basket full of these the other day and probably gonna have to harvest them again today. And then the Katrina cucumbers here, which are a little bit behind those Supremos for whatever reason, they didn't take off quite as fast. Finally starting to get some nice fruits right there. Probably be harvesting these tomorrow. Now when we planted these and when we set up our trellis, I told y'all that I wanted to do these a little differently than our spring planting, because with our spring planting I had a shorter trellis, and what happened was it just became overcrowded. It was too short, it was just too much foliage there, made harvesting kind of difficult. So with this planting, I wanted to use the tallest T-posts I had under the barn. I think these right here on the Supremo are 7.5, 8 foot tall. Those over there are 6.5, 7 foot tall. But in using taller T-posts, that meant that my trellis netting was gonna have to be off the ground a little bit. It wasn't gonna sit right on the ground like it normally does when I'm using shorter posts. And so what we did here before we set up this trellis, we let all these cucumber plants grow to about, I don't know, 3 foot long or so. And we pruned the bottom, say 3 or 4 nodes, and then we started training them on the netting there. Now some of the plants have grown a little bit at the bottom, and I've had to go back in and re-prune a little bit, but now you can kind of see the concept there, keeping it nice and clean at the bottom. Now little did I know at the time that having to get that trellis netting off the ground a little bit was going to be a blessing in disguise. So I accidentally figured out a new way of doing things that I'm really liking. Now before we get into the 5 reasons why I like this method so much, let's just talk about trellising cucumbers in general, because there are many different ways to do it. Now for slicing cucumbers, a lot of the commercial guys around here use that same Hortonova trellis netting, but they use wooden stakes kind of ran through it, and they're growing those cucumbers on plastic, just have long rows of that trellis netting, and they're growing them vertically that way. But for pickling cucumbers, a lot of the commercial guys around here don't trellis them at all. They just grow them along the ground. Some of them will have a crew of people out there harvesting them by hand. I've seen other operations where they have these huge machine harvesters that go in and harvest the pickles. So the commercial guys do it differently depending on the farm, the operation, the equipment they have, and then obviously backyard gardeners do it different as well. Some people will trellis their cucumbers using a fence panel. I've done that before, works pretty well. Some people don't trellis them at all, and they just let them grow on the ground like I was talking about with the commercial guys growing those pickles. Now personally, whether I'm growing big slicing cucumbers, those mini Katrina cucumbers, or pickles, I always like to trellis mine and grow them vertically as opposed to just letting them crawl on the ground. For one, they're a lot easier to pick when they're grown vertically. You don't have to bend down and dig around in all that foliage. Also keeps the fruits a lot cleaner if they're grown vertically. They're not as dirty as when they grow on the ground. And when you're harvesting them on the ground, you tend to stomp on the plants a lot, and you don't get quite as long of a lifespan out of your cucumber plants from my experiences. So trellising cucumbers is a must for me. But now let me tell you why this particular method, where we set that netting off the ground a little bit and prune the bottom of the plants, has worked so much better for us. So number 1, doing it like this has made weeding so much easier. You can easily see where the weeds are, just reach down there and pluck them out, or lightly cultivate them out with a hand hoe. So much easier than digging around in a bunch of cucumber foliage, pulling out weeds, trying not to disturb your plants. Now some might argue that having a dense foliage canopy on the ground there is going to smother out any weeds and you can use that to your advantage, and I get that point, but I've done it both ways, and I think keeping the weeds manageable on a system like this is way easier than having all those cucumber vines crawling on the ground. Secondly, this system right here makes fertilizing by hand so much easier. If we have cucumber vines all over the ground right here, it's kind of tough to get in there and put that fertilizer where we need to put it. But with easy access to the main stem of all these plants, we can mix us up some of this Agri-Thrive fruit and flower in our dog's bucket and pour it right there at the base of each of those plants. Really easy. And the third reason I like doing it this way, it's a lot easier to train the plants on the trellis and keep them on the trellis. So if we've got vines coming off the bottom of this main plant base here, yes, we can, once they get long enough, weave them into this netting up here, but they always somehow end up finding their way back on the ground. So by eliminating the vines just on those bottom few nodes there, we can keep everything off the ground, keep everything nice and clean here under our netting. And then the fourth reason I like this better, they're so much easier to harvest. On that spring planting we did, I was bending over, digging around the bottom of those vines right at the base of that trellis, harvesting the majority of my cucumbers just because I couldn't keep those vines on the trellis. They always wanted to go back down. With this system here, all my cucumbers are on the trellis netting. I can see them really easily and I don't have to bend over to harvest them. I just walk over there and pluck them off. And then the fifth reason I like doing it this way, it seems so much easier to manage pests and diseases. Now I haven't sprayed these or these with anything, but I can tell you, when you have just a jungle of cucumber vines all over the ground and all over your trellis where you're having to really dig in there to find your cucumbers, that's creating the perfect environment for pests and diseases. That's another reason why we thinned these plants out and didn't plant them near as thick as we had planted in the past. In the past, I've grown my cucumber plants just 3 or 4 inches apart, but here on this 10-foot stretch here, I've only got 6 plants. So we want a lot of nice foliage, but we don't want so much foliage that it's harboring a lot of pests and diseases. So given those 5 good reasons there, this is the way I'm planning on doing cucumbers in the future, as opposed to putting that fence trellis or trellis netting, whatever you're using, right there close to the ground, getting it about 1.5 to 2 foot off the ground, pruning the bottom of those plants and not putting quite so many plants in a given row there, so you give them a little more room to do their thing. Now I realize there are a lot of market farmers and even some backyard gardeners that do the whole single leader pruning technique with cucumbers, much like a lot of growers do with indeterminate tomatoes, and that seems to work well, but that's a little more work than I'm willing to put in for some cucumbers. So I think what we've done here is kind of a nice little compromise, somewhere in the middle of just letting them go crazy versus pruning the fire out of them and keeping them on a single stem. So it's nice to accidentally kind of fall into something that works really well every now and then. We didn't intend on having our netting that far off the ground, but with the size of those T-posts, we had to do it, and we realized, man, this is the way we need to do it going forward. And as a result, we're going to have some really nice cucumber production going into fall. Just as a side note, we get a lot of people asking about why their cucumbers are bitter. I've always thought it was a plant stress thing. These we've been able to keep happy with the drip irrigation, and those pickles there aren't bitter at all, and those mini cucumbers aren't bitter either. So let me know in the comments below what you think about doing it this way versus just having a jungle all over the ground. Do you prune your cucumbers a little bit, or you just let them roll? And as always, you can find seeds for both the varieties we're growing here on our website at lazydogfarm.com. And if you want to see step by step how we put together this type of cucumber trellis, watch this video from when we put one together back in the spring. We'll show you everything you need to make a really simple and effective cucumber trellis. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.